The young woman had always loved the sound of the piano. From the first moment she touched the keys at a small music shop in her town, she felt a strange kind of magic. She didn't have lessons or a fancy teacher. She learned by watching videos online and listening to the music that played on the radio, but every note she played carried her feelings. Every mistake was a lesson, every small success a spark that made her heart beat faster. She practiced quietly in the evenings, when the world outside was calm, and she could lose herself in the music without anyone watching. Her little room was filled with simple things: a small wooden desk with a few books stacked on it, a lamp that flickered sometimes, and an old piano that had been in her family for years. The piano wasn't perfect. Some keys were stiff and a few notes sounded off, but she didn't care. To her, it was more than an instrument. It was a friend, a place where she could speak without words, a place where she could pour her heart out. She had spent years playing alone, and though people in the town knew she could play, most didn't pay much attention. To them, music was just a hobby, something pretty to hear at weddings or small gatherings. But for her, it was life. Every morning she woke up thinking about the melodies she could create, and every night she went to bed humming tunes she had imagined. It was her world, and it felt safe. Then one day, news spread through the town that a famous pianist would be performing at the local theater. He was known for his incredible talent and also for his sharp tongue. Many admired him, but many feared his judgment. When people heard he would be in their town, excitement filled the air. Posters went up in the streets, shops announced it, and everyone seemed to be talking about him. She listened quietly, feeling a mixture of awe and fear. She had never met anyone like him, and the thought of being noticed by someone so skilled both thrilled and terrified her. A few days before his performance, he visited a small music shop to meet local musicians. It was a bright afternoon, and she happened to be at the shop. She was drawn to the piano there, a sleek, polished instrument that sang when touched. She sat down, fingers trembling slightly, and started to play a melody she had been working on for weeks. It was simple, yet soft and emotional, something that came straight from her heart. At first, people around her barely noticed. They were chatting and moving about, not paying much attention to a girl playing quietly in the corner. But then the famous pianist walked in. The air seemed to shift. Everyone turned to see him, tall and confident, moving through the shop with an almost demanding presence. He paused near her, listening briefly as her notes filled the room. She didn't recognize him at first, just thought he was another customer standing nearby. She played on, her eyes closed, imagining herself on a grand stage, feeling the music flow through her. But then she heard his voice, sharp and loud enough for the whole shop to hear. "Is that what you call playing?" he said. His eyes were critical, scanning her every movement. "I've heard children play better than this." The words struck her like cold water. Her fingers froze on the keys, and she opened her eyes slowly. People in the shop had stopped talking. Some looked at her with pity, others seemed embarrassed for her. She felt her face burn, a hot wave of shame rushing through her. She wanted to disappear, to vanish behind the piano, but she couldn't move. She had never felt such humiliation in her life. The pianist continued, walking around and shaking his head. "You have no idea what real music is," he said. "This is amateurish, messy, and lifeless. You shouldn't even be near a piano." Her chest tightened, and her heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst. She had always known she wasn't perfect, that she had a lot to learn, but she never expected someone so talented to mock her in front of everyone. She felt small, insignificant, like all the hours she had spent practicing had been for nothing. The piano that had always been her friend now seemed like a judge, echoing her failure. After a few moments, the pianist walked away, leaving her alone with the sound of the keys she had touched. She wanted to cry, but she didn't. Instead, she gathered her courage, lifted her hands, and played a few more notes quietly, almost as if trying to convince herself that she still had worth. The sound was soft, uncertain, but it was hers. People began to leave the shop, some whispering about the famous pianist, some still watching her. She packed her small notebook of melodies and slowly walked home, feeling the weight of his words pressing down on her. For the first time, she questioned everything. Maybe she wasn't talented. Maybe she had wasted her time. The thought made her stomach ache. That night, she sat at her piano at home, staring at the keys. She remembered the way her fingers had felt moving over them, the way the music had once made her feel alive. She thought about giving up, closing the piano lid for good and never playing again. But then she heard the melody she had played in the shop echoing in her mind. It was imperfect, yes, but it was still beautiful. It was still hers. Slowly, she started to play again, just a few notes at first, then more until the room was filled with sound. Her hands trembled, but she didn't stop. She let the music carry her, let it remind her of why she had started playing in the first place. The famous pianist's words were heavy, but they could not erase the love she had for the piano, the joy she found in each note. She spent hours that night practicing, experimenting, and trying to improve. She made mistakes, but this time she didn't care. Every mistake was a step toward becoming better, a step toward finding her own voice. The piano no longer felt like a place of judgment but a place of growth, a place where she could prove to herself that she was capable of more than anyone could see. Days turned into weeks, and she continued to practice with renewed determination. The memory of the ridicule stayed with her, but it no longer paralyzed her. Instead, it pushed her to work harder, to explore melodies that were uniquely hers, to let her emotions guide her fingers across the keys. She discovered small nuances in sound, subtle ways to make a simple tune feel powerful, and slowly, she began to believe in her own talent again. Her life remained simple. She continued her daily routine, going to work or school, helping her family, and playing her piano whenever she could. But inside, something had changed. She was no longer just a girl playing in a quiet room. She was someone with a purpose, someone who refused to be defined by the judgment of others, even a famous pianist. Every evening, she would sit at her piano, letting the music wash over her. Sometimes she would play the melody that had been ridiculed, shaping it, adjusting it, and slowly making it her own. Each time she played it, she felt a little stronger, a little braver. She realized that her love for music was bigger than anyone's opinion. It was something that belonged to her, something that no one could take away. And so, in the quiet of her small room, surrounded by the familiar comfort of her piano and her own determination, she began the journey that would change everything. The path would not be easy, and the world outside her window was full of challenges. But she had found a spark inside herself, a spark that no criticism could extinguish. And that spark, fragile and bright, would soon grow into a melody that could touch the hearts of everyone who listened. After that humiliating encounter with the famous pianist, the young woman felt a strange mixture of sadness and determination. Every time she tried to play, his words echoed in her mind, and it made her fingers shake. She sat at her piano, staring at the keys, wondering if she should give up. But then she remembered the way music had always made her feel alive. The quiet joy she experienced when a melody flowed from her heart through her fingers. That feeling was stronger than fear, stronger than shame. The days that followed were not easy. Every morning, she woke up feeling the weight of doubt pressing down on her. It was tempting to step away from the piano, to pretend she had never played, and to avoid the possibility of facing ridicule again. She wandered through her daily routines, completing her work, going to school, and helping at home, but her mind was never at rest. It was full of notes, rhythms, and fragments of melodies that refused to leave her. They whispered to her, urging her to keep going. One evening, her small living room became a battlefield. She sat at the piano, pressing the keys lightly, trying to recreate a melody she had once played with ease. But it came out wrong, clumsy, and stiff. She slammed her hand on the keys in frustration, sending a sharp, discordant sound echoing through the room. Tears filled her eyes, but she didn't leave the piano. Instead, she took a deep breath and began again. Each mistake was painful, each misplayed note a reminder of the pianist's harsh words, yet she refused to stop. She would play until her fingers ached and her heart ached, until she could create something she could be proud of. She began to experiment with melodies, combining the ones she knew with ones she imagined. She wrote them down in a small notebook she carried everywhere, scribbling notes on paper scraps whenever inspiration struck. Some of the melodies were simple and quiet, almost like a whisper. Others were bold, full of drama and tension. She played them over and over, adjusting each note, shaping the sound until it reflected what she felt inside. Her friends noticed the change. They saw her spending hours at the piano, sometimes forgetting to eat, sometimes skipping social events. A few tried to encourage her, reminding her that she was talented and that persistence could pay off. Others were skeptical, saying that no matter how much she practiced, she could never reach the level of someone like the famous pianist. Their words stung, but they didn't stop her. She realized that no one could measure her worth, except herself. One day, she decided to play for a small group of people in her town, a casual gathering in a local cafe. Her hands trembled as she approached the piano, and her heart raced with a mixture of excitement and fear. The audience was small, just a few curious neighbors and friends, but it felt like a stage the size of a grand theater. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and let her fingers move. The first few notes were shaky, but soon, the music began to flow. It was a melody she had been shaping for weeks, a piece that reflected her emotions. The sadness, the hope, the courage she had gathered from months of struggle. As she played, she felt the weight of doubt lifting, replaced by a strange, quiet confidence. The audience listened in silence, their eyes fixed on her, some nodding gently to the rhythm. When she finished, there was a moment of silence. Then a small round of applause began, hesitant at first, then growing stronger. She opened her eyes and saw faces smiling at her, faces that looked touched by the music she had shared. For the first time in a long while, she felt proud. The piano no longer felt like a place of judgment. It was a bridge to connection, a way to speak without words, a way to reach others through the language of melody. But even with this small success, the memory of the famous pianist's ridicule lingered. She knew that one day, if she wanted to truly prove herself, she would have to face someone who had once doubted her, someone whose opinion could have the power to make or break her confidence. The thought scared her, but it also motivated her. She practiced more intensely, exploring new techniques, listening to different styles, and experimenting with rhythms she had never tried before. She started to notice changes in herself. Her fingers became more confident on the keys, moving with a precision and grace she hadn't thought possible. Her melodies grew richer, more expressive, full of the emotions she had once been too shy to show. She realized that her struggle was shaping her into a musician with her own voice, someone who didn't just copy others, but created something uniquely hers. Evenings were the hardest, when the world outside her window quieted down, and she was left alone with her thoughts. Sometimes the doubt crept back, whispering that she wasn't good enough, that she would never be noticed, that her music would always be just a small-town hobby. But she learned to fight those thoughts with action. She played longer, harder, and more passionately. She poured every feeling into her music, from frustration to hope, from fear to courage, until the notes themselves became her words. Her small notebook of melodies grew thick with ideas, sketches, and partial compositions. She discovered the joy of creating something entirely new, something that could only come from her own experiences and emotions. She played with harmony and rhythm, finding ways to make simple notes sound powerful. Each melody she composed was a small victory, proof that she could grow beyond the limitations others placed on her. One rainy afternoon, she walked to a nearby park with her notebook, sitting on a bench as drops of rain splashed around her. She imagined the notes dancing in the air, reaching listeners far beyond her small town. She closed her eyes and hummed the melody softly, feeling it take shape in her mind before she returned home to bring it to life on her piano. It was a small ritual, but it reminded her that her passion could not be extinguished by ridicule or doubt. Her family, though not musicians themselves, noticed the transformation. They saw her dedication, her quiet determination, and the way her eyes lit up when she spoke of her music. They offered gentle encouragement, sometimes listening to her play, sometimes simply acknowledging her effort with a smile. Their support, small but steady, became a source of strength she could lean on when the world felt heavy. Weeks turned into months, and the young woman continued her journey. She set small goals, like perfecting a single melody or learning a challenging passage, celebrating each achievement quietly. She kept imagining what it would feel like to perform in front of a larger audience, to share her music with the world. The fear of ridicule had not disappeared, but it had transformed into determination, a drive to improve and to show herself what she was capable of. One evening, she heard about a small local music competition, open to anyone who wanted to participate. Her heart leapt at the thought, but nerves quickly followed. What if she failed? What if she was mocked again? The memory of the famous pianist's harsh words tried to pull her back, but she remembered the quiet victories of the past months. The melodies she had composed, the hours she had spent practicing, the small audience who had appreciated her music. These memories gave her courage. She decided to enter the competition. She spent days preparing, choosing a melody that represented everything she had learned and felt. It was a piece that carried her emotions, her struggles, her dreams. She practiced until her fingers ached, refining every note, every pause, every expression. She wanted this performance to be more than just music. She wanted it to be a statement of who she was. On the day of the competition, she arrived early, feeling a mix of anxiety and excitement. The room was filled with other participants, some confident, some nervous like her. She watched them perform, noticing their skill, their style, and sometimes comparing herself to them. But instead of letting jealousy or doubt take over, she focused on her own music, on the melody that had carried her through months of struggle. When it was her turn, she walked to the piano, took a deep breath, and let her fingers touch the keys. The first notes were soft, tentative, but soon, they grew stronger, richer, and full of emotion. She closed her eyes and let the music flow, letting her heart guide her hands. Every note told a story, every pause held meaning, every chord reflected her journey. By the time she finished, the room was silent. Then, slowly, applause began. It started small, but it grew, filling the space with warmth and recognition. She opened her eyes and saw smiles, nods, and a few tears. For the first time, she felt truly seen. Not for her skill compared to others, but for the honesty and emotion she brought to her music. It was a turning point, a moment when her persistence began to bear fruit. That night, she returned home, exhausted but elated. She knew the road ahead was long, and that there would be more challenges, more moments of doubt. But she also knew that she had grown stronger, more confident, and more connected to her music than ever before. She had learned that criticism, even from someone famous and skilled, could not define her. Only her dedication, her courage, and her love for music could do that. And so, she continued to play, to compose, to explore, and to dream. Every note she struck was a declaration of her resilience, every melody a testament to her journey. The ridicule of the past had become a driving force, a reminder that she could rise above judgment and create something uniquely her own. The piano, once a source of fear after that harsh encounter, was now a place of freedom, growth, and endless possibility. Months had passed since the young woman first faced ridicule from the famous pianist, and during that time, she had grown in ways she never imagined. Every evening, she sat at her piano, her hands moving with more confidence than before, her mind filled with melodies that seemed to flow effortlessly. She was no longer the uncertain girl who froze under criticism. She had learned to turn her fear into determination, and the piano had become a place where she could explore every emotion she felt. One afternoon, while sitting at her piano, she began experimenting with new sounds, pressing combinations of keys she had never tried. She let her feelings guide her hands, letting sadness, hope, and longing mix into something raw and emotional. She didn't think about what anyone would say, and she didn't try to imitate anyone else. The music came from deep within her, like a reflection of her soul, and she felt it carry a power she had never known before. She noticed something different in this new melody. It wasn't just a tune. It was a story. Each note seemed to speak. Each pause seemed to breathe. It was not perfect in the traditional sense, but it felt alive, honest, and unique. She wrote it down carefully in her notebook, marking every detail, afraid to lose it. This melody felt like more than a practice piece. It felt like a turning point. The young woman began to play it repeatedly, refining it, adjusting the tempo, the dynamics, the emotion behind each note. Hours turned into days and days into weeks. She played in her small room, imagining a larger audience, imagining the power of this melody reaching people's hearts. She became obsessed with perfecting it, not for fame, not for recognition, but because she felt that it carried her essence, her struggle, and her hope. Her family noticed the change. She had grown calmer, more focused, and yet more alive. They often found her playing late into the night, eyes closed, fingers moving almost magically over the keys. Her small notebook of melodies had become a collection of her journey, and this new piece felt like the crown jewel, the one that truly represented who she had become. One evening, she heard that a local music event would allow anyone to perform. It was not a big stage, but it was a chance to share music with an audience larger than the few friends who had heard her before. Her heart raced at the thought. She wanted to perform her new melody, to let it speak to others. But fear returned, reminding her of the ridicule she had faced. What if it wasn't good enough? What if people laughed? She took a deep breath and reminded herself of the months she had spent preparing, of the joy she felt while creating this melody, and of the fact that this music was hers and hers alone. The day of the performance arrived. She entered the hall quietly, carrying her notebook and feeling the familiar tremor of nervousness in her chest. She saw other musicians warming up, their confidence and skill intimidating, but she reminded herself that she had her own voice, and it was ready to be heard. She waited for her turn, listening to the other performances, and felt her excitement growing with every note she heard. The audience seemed attentive, curious, and she wondered how they would receive her music. When it was finally her turn, she walked to the piano, her hands slightly shaking. She sat down and closed her eyes for a moment, letting the memories of months of practice fill her mind. Then she began to play. At first, the notes were tentative, but soon they grew steady, strong, and flowing. Her melody filled the hall, soft at first, then swelling with emotion, carrying every ounce of her struggle, hope, and passion. As she played, she felt a strange connection with the audience. Some leaned forward, eyes closed, letting the music touch them. Others smiled, swayed slightly, or nodded to the rhythm. She no longer played for herself alone. She played to share, to communicate, to move hearts with the language only music could speak. The melody that had started as a private experiment had grown into something powerful, something that could reach beyond her room and touch real people. When the last note lingered in the air, there was a moment of silence, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Then the audience began to applaud, softly at first, then louder and louder. She opened her eyes and saw faces shining with appreciation, some with tears, some with awe. For the first time, she felt truly recognized, not for perfection or comparison, but for the honesty and depth of her music. Her melody had done what she had hoped. It had spoken. In the days following the performance, whispers about her talent spread through the town. People who had never thought much about her music now approached her, praising her unique style and the emotion she put into every note. Some asked her to perform again, others simply wanted to hear her play privately. The young woman felt a mixture of pride and humility. She had always known her music mattered, but hearing others acknowledge it was a new experience. This recognition was not what made her happiest. What thrilled her most was the discovery that she had the ability to create something new, something that could touch others' hearts. Her confidence grew, and with it, her creativity expanded. She started composing more complex pieces, exploring different rhythms, harmonies, and emotions. Each new melody became a step in her journey, a reflection of her growth and the obstacles she had overcome. One morning, while practicing, she received unexpected news. A local reporter had attended her performance and wrote an article about her. It mentioned her unique melody, her dedication, and her remarkable growth as a musician. The article circulated online, and suddenly more people were talking about the young woman and her music. She felt nervous about the attention, but also excited. It was a chance to reach even more listeners, to share her story through her music. The young woman realized that her journey had reached a turning point. She was no longer just the girl who had been ridiculed. She was a musician in her own right, with her own voice and the courage to share it. The melody she had created had become a symbol of her resilience, a piece that carried not only her talent but her story, her struggles, and her triumphs. Even with this progress, she remained humble and focused. She continued to practice diligently, not to impress others, but to continue growing and expressing herself. Each note she played reminded her of the long path she had traveled, from the small room where she had first learned to the moment when her melody had captivated an audience. She knew there would be more challenges ahead, but she had discovered an inner strength that could carry her through any doubt or fear. Her melody began to take on a life of its own. People requested it at gatherings, some even shared videos online, and the young woman watched as it quietly touched more lives than she had ever imagined. She began to understand the power of music. It was not only about skill but about honesty, emotion, and connection. Her unique creation had achieved what she had set out to do: transform her struggle into something beautiful and meaningful. Late one evening, as she practiced her melody once more, she thought about the famous pianist who had mocked her. She no longer felt fear or shame. Instead, she felt a quiet satisfaction. She had taken the pain of that ridicule and turned it into a force for growth, into a melody that spoke louder than words ever could. Her journey was still ongoing, but this breakthrough marked a moment she would always remember. A moment when her perseverance, creativity, and heart had truly shone through. In her small room, surrounded by the familiar comfort of her piano and her growing collection of melodies, she continued to play. She explored new possibilities, experimented with variations, and let her imagination run free. Every note was a step forward, every melody a declaration of her resilience. She had discovered not only her talent but her purpose: to create music that was honest, moving, and uniquely hers. And in that discovery, she found a joy and confidence that no criticism could ever take away. The young woman had been quietly growing in skill and confidence for months, but nothing could have prepared her for what happened next. News of her unique melody had reached the famous pianist, the same one who had ridiculed her months before. He had heard snippets of her music online, and curiosity pulled him to attend a local performance where she was scheduled to play. The thought made her nervous. She remembered his sharp criticism vividly. Yet, unlike before, her fear was tempered by months of hard work, practice, and small victories. She knew she had something worth sharing, and she was ready. On the day of the performance, she arrived early, her heart thumping with anticipation. The hall was filled with people, some familiar faces from the community, others who had heard of her talent through the article and social media. She set her bag down and walked to the piano, her hands slightly trembling but steady enough to play. She closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of her journey. The hours of practice, the sleepless nights, the doubts she had fought through, and she let it all settle into her mind. When it was her turn, she took a deep breath and began to play her melody. The first notes were soft, delicate, carrying the emotion that had been growing inside her for months. She felt a strange calm wash over her as her fingers moved naturally over the keys. The music poured out, honest and powerful, filling the hall with sound that seemed to touch every corner. The audience listened in rapt attention, their expressions showing awe, curiosity, and appreciation. She opened her eyes briefly and saw him in the back of the hall, the famous pianist. He was leaning slightly forward, arms crossed, his eyes fixed on her hands and the movement of the music. For the first time, she didn't feel fear. Instead, she felt a quiet determination. She was no longer the girl who froze under criticism. She was a musician, and this was her moment to share the music she had created with all the heart and soul she could muster. As she continued, the melody grew in complexity and emotion. It swelled and softened, rose and fell, capturing every feeling she had experienced over the months. She played not for recognition or approval, but because the music needed to exist, because it was a part of her that demanded to be expressed. The notes carried her courage, her struggle, and the joy she had rediscovered in playing the piano. The audience was captivated. People leaned in, some closing their eyes as they listened, some swaying slightly, letting the music wash over them. The young woman could feel the energy of the room, the connection forming between her and those who were hearing her for the first time. It was a powerful feeling, unlike anything she had ever experienced before. Her fingers danced across the keys with ease and confidence, her mind fully immersed in the melody. When the last note lingered in the air, there was a moment of silence, a collective breath held. Then the hall erupted in applause, a wave of sound that made her heart soar. She looked toward the back and saw the famous pianist standing, clapping slowly at first, then with more enthusiasm. His eyes held a mixture of surprise, respect, and admiration. For the first time, he saw her not as an amateur, but as a musician with a voice of her own. After the performance, he approached her, and the nerves she had felt earlier returned for a brief moment. She stood quietly, unsure of what he might say. But when he spoke, his tone was different from before. There was no sharpness, no ridicule, only honesty and acknowledgement. "I underestimated you," he said, his voice calm and sincere. "I was wrong to judge you before. Your music is original, full of emotion, and very moving. You have a rare talent that cannot be ignored." The young woman felt a mixture of relief and pride. She had feared this moment, worried that his approval or disapproval would define her. But now, she realized that while recognition was gratifying, her true achievement was the journey itself, the dedication, the perseverance, and the creation of music that was uniquely hers. They spoke for a few moments longer. He asked about her approach to composing, the methods she had used to develop her melody, and the inspirations behind her work. She explained how she had experimented with rhythms, harmonies, and emotions, how she had spent countless hours practicing and refining her music, and how every note carried a piece of her story. He listened intently, nodding, occasionally offering a thoughtful comment or suggestion, but mostly absorbing her passion and creativity. In that conversation, the young woman realized that his earlier ridicule had, in a strange way, pushed her to grow. It had been painful, but it had forced her to confront her weaknesses, to work harder, and to find her own voice. What had once felt like a wound had become a driving force, shaping her into a musician capable of creating something that could move others. The famous pianist invited her to perform at a larger event, a chance to share her music with an even wider audience. The offer was both thrilling and intimidating, but she accepted. She knew that this was another step in her journey, another opportunity to grow, and another moment to let her music speak for itself. She left the conversation with a sense of accomplishment and anticipation, knowing that her dedication had earned recognition and opened doors she had once thought impossible. In the weeks that followed, she continued to practice diligently, refining her melody and exploring new compositions. She met with the pianist occasionally, learning from his experience while maintaining her unique style. She discovered that mentorship was not about imitation, but about guidance, about finding ways to strengthen her own voice rather than changing it. Each session brought new insights, and she grew more confident with every note she played. Her life began to change in small but significant ways. Invitations to perform arrived from different parts of the town, and eventually from neighboring towns as well. People who had once overlooked her talent now sought her out, eager to hear her music and witness her growth. Yet, despite the growing recognition, she remained humble, remembering the long journey from the quiet room where she had first practiced alone to the stage, where her music now resonated with others. Late one night, as she sat at her piano, she reflected on the transformation she had undergone. The ridicule that had once wounded her had become a catalyst for her growth. She realized that criticism, even from someone famous and skilled, did not define her. Her resilience, creativity, and dedication did. The piano had been her refuge, her teacher, and her voice, and it had guided her through the moments of doubt into the light of achievement. Her relationship with music deepened. She no longer played solely to improve or to impress. She played to express, to connect, and to discover the endless possibilities of sound. Each new melody became a journey, each note a reflection of her growth, and each performance an opportunity to touch the hearts of those who listened. The young woman understood that recognition from the famous pianist was meaningful, but it was not the ultimate reward. The true reward was the knowledge that she had persevered, that she had transformed pain into creativity, and that she had found a voice that was entirely her own. She had taken the spark of ridicule and turned it into a fire of talent, determination, and self-expression that could not be extinguished. As she prepared for her next performances, she felt a quiet confidence. She knew that the road ahead would have challenges, that there would be moments of doubt and perhaps even criticism, but she also knew that she was capable of overcoming them. Her journey had taught her that success was not measured solely by applause or recognition, but by growth, resilience, and the courage to share one's true self with the world. In the stillness of her room, surrounded by the familiar comfort of her piano and the melodies she had created, she played late into the night. The music flowed freely, rich with emotion, depth, and authenticity. She felt a sense of peace, knowing that she had not only proven herself to others but, more importantly, to herself. She had grown from a young girl who had been mocked into a musician whose melodies spoke louder than any words, and she was ready to continue her journey, bringing her music to all who would listen. The young woman's life had changed in ways she had never imagined. After months of struggle, perseverance, and countless hours at her piano, she had finally found her voice. The melody she had created, born from her heart and honed through her dedication, had touched the hearts of many. The same melody that once caused her to doubt herself had become a symbol of her resilience and her unique talent. Her performances began to attract larger audiences. Invitations arrived from other towns, and eventually from cities farther away. Each performance brought a mix of excitement and nervousness, but she had learned to channel those feelings into her music. She no longer played just to impress others. She played to express herself, to share her journey, and to connect with those who listened. Every note carried her story, every pause reflected her emotions, and every melody spoke of her growth. The famous pianist continued to mentor her, guiding her through complex compositions and offering insights that helped her refine her craft. Yet, he never asked her to change her style or imitate others. Instead, he encouraged her to explore her own ideas, to let her emotions guide her fingers, and to trust the voice she had discovered. Under his guidance, she became not only a better musician technically, but also a more confident and expressive performer. She began to realize that her journey had meaning beyond herself. People started approaching her after performances, sharing how her music had touched them, how it had brought comfort, joy, or inspiration. Some spoke of personal struggles and how her melodies had given them hope. She listened with humility, understanding that her music could reach beyond words, connecting with people in ways that were deeply personal and profound. It was a gift she had never imagined giving to others, and it filled her with a sense of purpose. Despite the growing recognition and opportunities, she remained grounded. She continued to practice daily, exploring new melodies, experimenting with rhythm, harmony, and dynamics. Each piece she created was a journey, a reflection of her emotions, and a testament to her dedication. She never stopped learning, never stopped pushing herself, and never stopped seeking ways to make her music more authentic and moving. One day, she was invited to perform at a prestigious music festival. The event brought together musicians from around the world, and she felt a mixture of excitement and nerves. She knew she would face talented performers, some with years of formal training and international recognition. Yet, instead of feeling intimidated, she focused on her melody, on the hours she had spent perfecting it, and on the emotions she wanted to convey. She understood that her music was not about comparison. It was about honesty and connection. The festival day arrived, and the hall was filled with anticipation. She walked onto the stage, took a deep breath, and let her fingers find the keys. The music flowed effortlessly, full of emotion and authenticity. The audience listened intently, moved by the depth and sincerity of her performance. The melody, once confined to her small room and modest performances, now resonated through a grand hall, reaching hundreds of hearts. Every note carried her journey, from humiliation to perseverance, from self-doubt to confidence. When she finished, the applause was overwhelming. Standing ovations, smiles, tears, and heartfelt congratulations filled the space. She felt a profound sense of accomplishment, not just because of the recognition, but because she had stayed true to herself and her music. The famous pianist, sitting in the front row, clapped with pride, a gentle smile on his face. His early ridicule seemed distant now, a reminder of how far she had come, a catalyst that had sparked her determination and creativity. After the festival, opportunities continued to grow. She was asked to perform in other countries, to collaborate with other musicians, and to record her compositions. Yet, she remained connected to the simplicity that had fueled her passion in the beginning. She still practiced in quiet moments, returned to her small room when she needed reflection, and continued to compose melodies that came from the heart rather than expectation. Her story inspired others, especially young musicians who struggled with self-doubt or lacked formal training. She shared her journey openly, emphasizing that talent alone was not enough, but dedication, persistence, and the courage to express oneself could overcome obstacles. She encouraged others to find their voice, to embrace failure as a step toward growth, and to let passion guide their creativity. In her personal life, she remained humble and connected to those who supported her early on. Her family, friends, and mentors celebrated her successes without letting fame change her. She never forgot the quiet moments of doubt, the nights spent practicing alone, and the sting of ridicule that had set her on this path. Those memories became part of her story, a reminder that every struggle could become a stepping stone toward something greater. The young woman also explored new directions in her music, blending styles, experimenting with soundscapes, and creating compositions that reflected her evolving emotions. Each new piece was an adventure, a chance to challenge herself and to communicate more deeply with listeners. She discovered that the journey of a musician was never truly complete, and that growth, exploration, and creativity were endless. She began teaching small groups of aspiring musicians, sharing her knowledge, experience, and passion. She emphasized the importance of emotional expression, perseverance, and authenticity in music. Her students looked up to her not only for her skill but for her story, for the courage she had shown in turning ridicule into triumph. She found joy in helping others discover their own voice, guiding them to find melodies that reflected their hearts. Through it all, she never lost sight of why she played. Music was not merely a career or a path to recognition. It was a way of life, a language of emotion, and a means of connection. Every note she played, every melody she composed, was a reflection of her experiences, feelings, and growth. She had discovered that true artistry came not from perfection, but from honesty, courage, and the willingness to embrace one's journey. Years passed, and the young woman became known not only as a talented pianist, but also as a musician who inspired others through her story and her music. She performed on grand stages, collaborated with renowned artists, and shared her melodies with audiences around the world. Yet, she remained grounded, always returning to the piano in her small room, where it all began, where she first discovered the power of her own music. Looking back, she realized that the ridicule she had once faced was a turning point, a moment that could have broken her spirit, but instead fueled her determination. It taught her resilience, the importance of self-belief, and the strength that comes from pursuing one's passion despite obstacles. Her melody, born from heartache and perseverance, had transformed her life and touched countless others. In the quiet moments, as she sat at her piano, she smiled at the journey she had taken. The young girl who once doubted herself had grown into a musician whose music spoke louder than words, whose melodies carried emotion, and whose story inspired others to pursue their dreams. She understood that the greatest achievement was not the applause, the recognition, or the opportunities, but the discovery of her own voice, the courage to follow it, and the joy of sharing it with the world. And so, Surrounded by the familiar keys, the melodies she had created, and the endless possibilities of music, she continued to play. Each note was a testament to her growth, each melody a celebration of her journey, and each performance a connection to hearts everywhere. Her story, once marked by ridicule, had become a story of triumph, perseverance, and the transformative power of music.